Okay, first of all, I just want to take a moment to welcome everybody to our first My Power Haute Route webinar. Congratulations on being selected as a sponsored rider, and can't wait to learn more about all of you. What we're going to do in this first session is just kind of cover the basics of training with power. So if you haven't trained with power before, don't worry. We're going to teach you everything you need to know. And for those of you who are more experienced with training with power, maybe at some point we can have an offline discussion if you want to take the analysis a little deeper. But today's webinar is just geared to get you up and running and teach you the basics. I do always like to start with one of my favorite quotes, where performance is measured, performance improves. Where performance is measured and reported, the rate of improvement accelerates. Basically what it's saying is that which is recorded improves. So I think you've taken the first step to get better as a rider by tracking what you're doing. Once you actually have historical data, it's just an invaluable tool to even take your riding to the next level. So, power simplified. I know a lot of times people think that training with power has to be this incredibly complicated process, and I assure you it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be complicated at all, but it does have to be true. And what does that mean? Well, you can just learn some basic fundamentals about training with power and recording your data and what to look at. However, if you don't have an accurate power meter or you don't have accurate data, it's irrelevant, right? So that's the reason why it has to be true. The good thing is we've set you up with the most accurate power meter on the market. There's some things that you need to do as a rider, but we'll cover that later. So if you're new to power, what the heck do you do first? Well, once you get it on your bike, I always tell people, you know what, just go for a ride. Just go for a couple of rides. Upload the data cycling analytics, give me a chance to review it, and I can give you some feedback. But don't try to change anything right away. It's always great to just go for a ride and see how you normally, what's your normal cadence, what's your normal power. Trying to adjust your numbers right away, you need to get a few rides under your belt and actually see what you've been doing up to this point. So easy enough, just ride. We're going to go over functional threshold power and field testing and talk a little bit about cycling analytics and the Navi 2 Coach GPS computer. So that's just kind of the outline for today. And I already see a typo. Simple but true. So I talked about this just a moment ago. Learn the fundamentals first. There are a few basic things that you can learn, and it's all you need to do. Progress at your own pace. You can dive deeper, and I'm here to help as well. If you want to learn more stuff, it's great. But I always liken it to or compare myself to how I use Excel. I know it's this incredible tool that does all these things, but I probably use 10% of it, but it's the 10% that I need to make it work for me. So can I dig deeper? Can I learn more? Absolutely. Do I have to still have it be functional and helping, and helpful for me? No, I don't. So this is where you can learn to use InfoCrank to just kind of clarify your training. Another good analogy is it's like needing glasses and getting glasses and what it does to your vision. Once you start training with power, all of a sudden, you just realize like, oh my gosh, I can just do a few simple things and make a huge difference. And this is where it goes back to if and only if you have a proven and accurate, reliable power meter, which you do now. And the other key point that's really dependent on the rider is you regularly upload ride data and you update your personal data, such as weight and functional threshold power. Now we're going to cover functional threshold power so you know exactly what it is. We'll test you for it and figure it out. But if you don't actually upload data and keep your personal metrics up to date, then the data is completely irrelevant. So it's key, right? It's just something that has to happen, but it should be pretty easy. Back to what I said before. Now you've got an InfoCrank, you've never trained with power, what the heck do you do? Well, go for some rides. You know, try not to obsess over any numbers you see. Maybe not even look at your Navi2 coach or your Garmin or whatever head unit you're using. Just go ride. Upload the data. I'll take a look at it, and then what I'll do is give feedback based on individual analysis. So what I always like to do is when I do have a background in coaching and working with Power, and a lot of times people will come to me just for a consult and say, hey, can you just take a look at some files and give me some recommendations? So that's my plan to do with all of the My Power Haute route riders is, you know, get a few just regular rides from them, take a look at the data, and let people know what I see. And if I think there's, you know, some general recommendations that I can make just based on that, I'll go ahead and do it. And it's always kind of fun. I like to not know anything about the files that I'm looking at because I don't want to know anything. I just want to be able to show riders what just raw data can show you about their technique and about their fitness level. So again, it's one of those pretty basic things, but it's really fun to show people, look at how much these numbers tell me about you. Does anybody have any questions about that?
No, that's fairly clear.
Okay. So functional threshold power. This is the most common metric that's used in training with power. What is it? It is the maximum average power that a cyclist can sustain for about 60 minutes. I say about 60 minutes because there's some debate actually as to the exact time length, but for our purposes, we're just going to use 60 minutes. So you can think of it as, you know, just a 1 hour time trial. No warm up, no cool down, 60 minutes, all out as fast as you can go. Functional threshold power is dynamic. That means it changes throughout the season. You know, generally a cyclist will, you know, start out the season whenever that is, and you're not quite as fit. And then you get to your peak form at some point in the season, and then you generally lose a little bit of form towards the end of the season. So it's important to regularly test your functional threshold power, or FTP. Again, going back to your data is only relevant and helpful if it's accurate. So if I do an FTP test in January, and then I go to a training camp, or, you know, I put in a huge block of training, which should raise my functional threshold power, but then I never retest, I'm still using an old number that's no longer accurate. Why do we use functional threshold power? It's similar to blood lactate testing, and that has been proven to be highly predictive of performance and endurance events. So it's basically, you know, we can look and see, it's going to tell us how fit you are, really, for endurance, so longer events. But I'm a bigger fan of a field test instead of in the lab or blood lactate testing because it's real world conditions. So functional threshold power, as opposed to blood lactate testing, it's where you do it on the road. So it's repeatable and it's accurate data that you're going to be using while you're out riding, not necessarily something that occurred in the lab. So like I said, how do we use it? We use it to assess current levels of fitness, to measure progress. We also use it to determine power-based training zones and intensities, and I'll cover that in the next webinar. And prescribe and monitor training. Also to determine pacing and or strategy for optimal performance. So how are you guys going to use it in the Haute route? Well, we're going to figure out your functional threshold power, come up with some zones, and then be able to tell you, here's what we think you can average on a 1 hour climb, on a 2 hour climb, on, you know, multiple days of racing or, you know, riding in a very strenuous event. So it'll give you an idea. You'll be able to say, okay, maybe I can ride at 150 watts on a certain climb, rather than not knowing. You know, the whole thing about training with power is we want to teach you how to read your body. So it's a perfect tool for that because it's always 200 watts is always 200 watts. If you are using a heart rate monitor or you're using speed or distance, all those things are so variable, right? Heart rate can vary whether you have a lot of caffeine or you don't have caffeine, or whether you're fatigued from training, or whether you slept well or you didn't sleep well. It could be windy, you could have a tailwind, it could, lots of different things, but 200 watts is always 200 watts. So it's a very, I call it, the common language that we can speak to talk about your training and pacing and progress. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So hopefully you guys are all going to partake in a field test so that we can actually determine your FTP. There's two options. One is a 60-minute, the maximum effort or time trial, which is the raw number that we talked about. That's what your FTP is, right? 60 minutes. However, especially for people new to training with Power, or people who haven't done this before, it's a really hard effort. 60 minutes is a long time to stay focused, to stay on the rivet, to know how to pace yourself. How do you know how hard you can go for 60 minutes? It's pretty tough. And finding a proper route, and it just really hurts. I mean, going full gas for 60 minutes is actually quite painful. So option two, and this is the one that most, I think, riders and coaches use these days, is a 20-minute maximum effort for time trial. And we do this by saying, okay, 20 minutes is a lot easier to manage than 60 minutes. And then we keep, the common formula is taking 90 to 95% of that average power, and that becomes your estimated functional threshold power. So I put which one will you be doing, because if I were you, I would choose the 60, or the 20 minute, sorry, the 20-minute maximum time trial. We can also use, if people have older rides where, they did a 1 hour climb or something like that, or they've done a 40K time trial, we can use it. But because, again, going back to, you need to test it regularly because it changes, I'm a big fan of just knocking one out, I have my athletes do them every 4 to 6 weeks. So, and it's certainly not going to hurt you leading up to the Haute route, because you've got some big efforts ahead of you. So I don't think it will affect your training or preparation in any way to do a field test.
So you mentioned route and doing hill climbs. Do you have a recommended route or terrain to do the 20 minutes on? And presumably you're trying to go absolutely flat out for 20 minutes non-stop.
Exactly. Well, with my athletes, my personal preferences, I tell them they can do it anywhere. Everybody always wants to do it on a hill, right? Because that's where you can generate the most power. So your numbers look better. But I tell my athletes that they must maintain 85 RPMs or higher. So if they drop below 85 RPMs, then I'm not using it, because I think you should be able to be spinning somewhat, not mashing out like 50 or 60 RPMs. And for my advanced athletes, I actually make them do it on a slightly rolling terrain. So
slightly what's
rolling,
rolling.
Yeah. That can be tough for people who've never done a test, though, because if you're looking at the numbers when you're riding, you'll see the average power drop, and it can freak out a little bit, thinking, oh my God, I'm losing all my power, so a gentle grade seems to work best.
Right.
I would say less than 5%.
At this point, I've only been training using heart rate, so if I was going to do a 20-minute test and I wanted to ensure that I was at sort of full gas, could I just be looking at my heart rate data to show me that I'm actually pulling what I think is my maximum effort?
Yeah, I mean, if that's how you paced yourself in the past, then absolutely. If it's something, a gauge for you, sure. And then once we get one, then we can look at your power and then start to use that. But if you've been using heart rate, for sure, it's long enough that, you can definitely do it. I always tell people, ideally, you should, be in the last minute blowing up, like struggling, right? So you just want to make sure to empty the tank.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, the application or website that we're going to be using is called Cycling Analytics. It's cyclinganalytics.com. It's been my program of choice for several years now. I really like it because it provides really all the analysis that I need. And I'm just going to flip over to that right now. So if you haven't taken a look at it yet, here it is. cyclinganalytics.com. Your username should be your email, and you should have received a password from me. If you have any trouble logging in, send me an email and let me know. What it usually looks like, I think, let's see, rides. Yeah, I've got it on rides here. I think this is the home screen that you see. I have a coaching subscription, so it might look a little different to people. But like I said, the reason why I like it is, let's see, power curve. Let's take a look at that first. So once you upload a few rides, what you'll be able to see is something called the power curve. This is the older version. If you see down here, it says try the new power curve chart, and if you click on the link, you actually get a chart with a little bit more colors. So I haven't been riding lately, so I don't have any really recent stuff. But basically what this chart does in a nutshell is everything from 1 second to 5 hours. It shows me exactly where I hit my peak power numbers. So my peak 2 second ever was January of 2012. And most recently, let's see, June 14th, I hit 677. And then in July, my peak wise were 563. So again, you can go up to like 1 minute power numbers. There's my peak ever, 314, June, 311, and in July so far it looks like 292. So you can see 5 minute. The nice thing is if I click on that, if I click on the bar where I want to see, it also takes me down here. So I see what ride it was. And then if I click on the link, it should take me exactly to that ride and I can take a look at it. So it's super cool to be able to see all of your peak power numbers in one graph. The other thing, let's see, training load is fitness and training over time. And I don't want you to get too worried about knowing what all this stuff is. I'm just kind of highlighting what cycling analytics can show you, but we'll cover everything in the next webinar about cycling analytics. So when we're talking about training load, I like to explain it as it's fitness over time. A lot of times people can really spend a lot of time looking at every individual ride, which is important, but it's also important to see the forest for the trees. So if you think of individual rides as the trees and fitness over time as the forest, this is where we see big trends. And the really cool thing is this graph, the blue line is long-term stress, and that's generally my fitness level right now. The kind of red or orangey line is short-term stress, and that's my fatigue level. And then the daily training load are the yellow bars. Stress balance is how fresh I am, or my form. So the difference between long-term stress, my fitness over the past 6 weeks, versus my short-term stress, which is my training over the past week, the difference between the two is what we call form or freshness. So what this chart shows me is current fitness, and now I can peak for my event. So for you guys as Haute route riders, this is so valuable to you because we're going to be able to completely dial in your training so that you go into the event as fit and as rested as possible without detraining. It takes the guesswork out of peaking. It used to be this kind of art, how do you peak for an event? Well, this chart clears it all up for us, and we can look because each ride gets something called a training load number, and it's the physiological toll that workout took on your body. So all these little yellow lines down at the bottom are my ride for that day. So this, again, is just a super cool chart. And so if I look, I've been logging things in cycling analytics for a while, and I can also see my fitness trends over time in a snapshot. Questions about this chart?
Obviously, we're not going to have very much historical data for you to be able to look at.
Right.
So it's going to be difficult to see
what
you're doing, unless this general data information that I've got from my Garmin is useful for you to see over time, over the last 6 months or something.
It would be cool because I noticed that you did upload some. So if it's not it'll, if you don't have a power meter but you have heart rate data, it'll still assess a physiological score. So it's still super valuable. You know, it's better than nothing, right? So it's in guessing. So I would definitely, if you have older files that you can upload, please do, and then we can take a look at that.
Yeah. And of course, the other thing is I'm doing the Haute Route Pyrenees, and that's in 3 weeks.
3 weeks. No. So here.
I'm kind of thinking that this is the point in time that I'm reducing the amount of training I'm doing, certainly in volume and intensity, as I'm tapering off towards the actual event.
Do you work with a coach?
I don't, no.
Okay.
I've had a coach previously for other events. I did a lot of triathlon, so that's where I've had coaching before.
Okay. Let's see. Where was your? I saw you. I think you were. Do you see your name? Oof. I'm just gonna look at what you've uploaded. I thought you were down at the bottom here. There you are. So what distance triathlons have you done?
Oh, I've done everything up to Ironman.
Oh, okay. So that's great because. And how long have you been doing Ironmans or long distance?
I mean, I've been doing triathlons for ages, but I've just various running injuries meant I've sort of dropped the swimming and running and just concentrate on the cycling now.
Okay, sounds good. So I just happened to, I pulled up your information, and what we can see there is a TRIM score, which is basically a training load score. So we can see what you've been doing. So if we actually wanted to take a look at your training load, here we go. Let's see. Yep. So right now, it looks like you've got, let's see if I can get to the 23rd. There we go. So long-term stress of 163, short-term stress of 203. Now, what I'm wondering is, because I haven't put in your functional threshold power yet either, so in heart rate, do you know what your threshold heart rate is?
So there's the heart rate zones that are set up in Strava, which I think are the same, pretty much the same as the ones that have been set up here.
Okay, so your maximum heart rate is 172?
Yeah.
Okay, and do these look like pretty
They're
accurate?
about the same as well. They're pretty good, yeah.
Okay, so if we go back to training load, again, this might change if you upload, more data. Do you train quite a bit? Have you been putting in? Yeah, because it looks like, just based on this chart, you're pretty tired today.
Yeah, so this is the last big week of training that I'm doing, so I'm putting in some longer rides and some harder rides.
Okay, so I'm showing a long-term stress of 163, a short-term stress of 203. So you see the difference of those two numbers. The stress balance is -41. You definitely want to go into the Haute route with somewhere around like a stress balance of 0 to 10, a positive number.
Right, okay.
So you're doing good. Right now is right where you should be. Like you're just said, this is the last big week, so you're on track. But we can actually plug in future numbers and plot out that graph going into the Haute route. Like you can send me or tell me the rides, or you can add in the rides on your own calendar of what you think you're going to do or for your training plan. I can estimate a load, and then we can calculate out, okay, is that going to make you rested enough? And tweak your training to make sure that you arrive.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah.
It's cool, right? I know, it's awesome. Yeah. All right, so we'll work on that. Let's see. There's the calendar, which, let's see, calendar, single ride analysis, power rounds. Okay. Whoops. So we were looking at the calendar. I'll show you a little bit about that. Calendar is rides. And here it is. I like it because you can also make comments. Now that I see that you're uploading rides, if I looked at a certain file and I click on it, here it gives me the summary stats. You can see what you've done in each zone. This is the training score. It was 94. Again, if the heart rate zones are pretty correct, a 1 hour maximum effort training load. So if you went out and did that 60-minute TT, you would get a score of 100. no warm up, no cool down, 60 minutes full out. Basically, the most you can score in an hour is 100, and that's
Okay.
and recovery rides are usually anywhere from like 30 to 45, maybe. So to me, this says this was a pretty good effort.
Yeah, so that's like a short training ride with a hill. I've just gone full gas up the hill.
There you go. And I can see your time and zones, right? So yeah, there's your recovery, your zone 2, but you had quite a bit in zone 3, 4, and 7 minutes. It's saying anaerobic, so that's a lot.
It's a long hill.
Yeah. Here's a graph of your heart rate, speed, cadence, elevation. There's lots of things that you can do. I can search for climbs. There's, again, histograms, how much time was spent at different ranges of power or heart rate. This is a cadence, but if we select heart rate, there's a breakdown of your heart rate. So just a lot of, like I said, this is where you can, dive in and really look at things and select certain stuff. But if you just go back to rides, it looks like you linked your Strava account too, which is awesome. It tells me, this little graph right here tells me your time and zones at a glance. So you can see they change from rider, like this is a recovery, a lot of time in zone 1. Here, not so much.
Yeah, that was a recovery one, so you can see that was low impact.
Exactly. So you can see the charts. You can plan stuff going forward. So if you knew your ride for tomorrow, here I could put in, or you could put in your workout. And here you can estimate the training load, and that's where it calculates it going forward. So the other thing is when you get into, let's see, just myself, once you start working with your InfoCrank, let's see if I look at one of my rides here, you'll see left-right power balance, and you'll see things like torque effectiveness and pedal smoothness. We'll cover those later, but just a lot more metrics that you can take a look at. So that's the reason why, Cycling Analytics is really the most advanced, user-friendly program out there on the market. Let's see, what else? So, Navi2 Coach Computer. You haven't gotten yours yet, have you, Ian?
No, I haven't got mine yet.
Okay. I did send links to a YouTube video that I did. I think it's about 20 minutes long that, I'm actually walking through setting it up. I'm using the software. There's 2 ways that you can set your screens or your pages up on your Navi2 Coach. You can either use the software or you can just do it from the unit itself. So once you get it, this will make more sense. I always recommend a minimum of 3 screens. I think there's 6 total. And I have one. My first one is always just kind of general data. My second one is intervals, and my third one is pedal balance stuff. And then the fourth one, I usually just fill in of stuff for fun. Elevation, how much I've climbed, how much I've descended, maybe the temperature, other things like that. I'll send everybody a copy of this presentation too. But for me, over the years, what's my general ride data look like? I like to see my ride time. I like to see the time of day. And I just want my current stuff, the watts I'm putting out right that second, cadence, speed, and distance covered. I keep it pretty basic. And I don't, I look at it, but if I'm doing an interval, I really want specific numbers, and I really want average power, average cadence, average speed, because what you'll notice, the first thing you'll notice on general ride data is your watts will be jumping all over the place. And if you try to do an interval just looking at your current watts, you might go crazy because it'll just be impossible to keep it at a steady wattage. But there's this thing called lap average power. There's a metric. And if you select that, you can dial in the watts within, the exact watt. Like if you say you're going to try to average 200 watts on this hill, you can peg it at 200 watts because it's the average power. So it's not as variable. Same thing with cadence and even speed. So it's something that I found really helps me do my intervals much more successfully. and because otherwise what happens is you're like, oh my gosh, they dropped, and then you pedal, and then they go super high, and then you come back down, and you have this really jumpy line versus a nice steady line, which is usually what you want to see for intervals. And then, let's see, the next one is the pedal balance screen. And this is one that I always have on ours because it's one of the things that sets InfoCrank apart. We have true pedal balance, and we also have torque effectiveness and pedal smoothness. Is it something that I look at a ton while I'm riding? Not necessarily. Usually it's after the ride. Sometimes pedal balance. I will have that one up. But torque effectiveness, pedal smoothness, a lot of times I'll end up looking at that after the ride and then determine, how I can improve those numbers on the next ride. But I don't spend a whole lot of time looking at it, quite honestly, while I'm riding, unless I'm doing specific work to improve those numbers. But for you guys, I think at first, let's just get the basics down. So I would definitely recommend the interval screen for that. And then this is sometimes just kind of fun to look at, see what you're doing. The last page, questions, concerns, comments. Now is when you fire away, or you can shoot me an email. So does anyone have any questions about what I covered?
Now I'm just itching to get them on my bike and give them a try.
It is addictive because one of the things too about training with power is now you got a carrot, and you'll start chasing those numbers and you'll look for the improvement. And once you start gathering data, you really do get addicted to it, and it's just it can be really fun actually to see the improvement, and it'll also. We talk about always, improving your numbers. It'll also tell you, like when we looked at your training load, when you're tired and when you need a break. And sometimes some of us sort of need someone or something to tell us it's okay to take a day off.
Yeah, so two things I'm really bad at. One of them is not knowing when to stop training or to just take a day off. Yeah. And the other thing is pacing in events. I've got a really bad habit of just going off super quick and
so this is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And have you done the Haute route before?
I haven't. I've done plenty of sporties. I actually live in France, so I do quite a lot of cycling in the Pyrenees already. So.
Oh, great. So I think you're going to find this very helpful then. And so you're only 3 weeks out, but like you said, you've done the bulk of the work. Now we just get to make sure that we send you in, primed and ready to go, and to help you get through the event.
One of the things I'm concerned about is the tapering and making sure that I stay with good form, but not going to the race being tired, and making sure that I make sure I carry on doing enough, but not too much, as it were, before the race.
Exactly. And you can't come into proper peak form without detraining a little bit, right? But the idea is we minimize the amount of detraining you do, because sometimes people they rest too much.
Yeah.
And the more you do these, or the more we learn about your data, we learn different people have different, I guess, stress balance numbers that they like to go into events for. I have one athlete who likes to go in with just a little bit of fatigue. I have another athlete who needs to go in really rested. And these are the things you learn about yourself with the more data that you get. But sounds awesome. All right, well, you've got my email. I will send this presentation out to people, and we have recorded it so people can watch it on their own. Thanks everybody for attending, and I'm going to stop recording now and keep you guys on the line.